Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. Welcome back. We're ready to talk about the second portion of external respiration. External respiration, remember, is talking about getting air moving from the external environment into the body and from the body back to the external environment. We've been talking about pulmonary ventilation all this time, which I think about as just, breathing. And now we're ready to talk about alveolar ventilation, which is the movement of the air into the respiratory portion. So this is the portion of the lungs where gas exchange will actually be happening. Now, we said with each one of our ventilations, there were different gas laws at play. And here we need to talk about both Henry's law and then also Dalton's law. And again, you're going to get the Michele Glass version of these. So when we talk about Henry's law, what we're talking about is the concentration of the gas in a liquid. Concentration of gas in a liquid is proportional to its solubility and partial pressure. Okay. And when we talk about partial pressure, that's our direct connection over to Dalton's law, because Dalton's law tells us that in a mix of gases, each individual gas has its own partial pressure. Basically, that's the Michele Glass version. So what we're talking about when we say mix of gases, each individual gas has its own partial pressure. What we're saying is, like in air, you have nitrogen gas, you have oxygen, you have carbon dioxide, you have water vapor. And each one of those gases, oxygen, CO2, nitrogen, water vapor, they have their own partial pressure. They have their own partial pressure. And Henry's law is talking about the solubility of that gas in the liquid, which is important because we're transporting all of our gases in liquid, right? Body fluids. Okay, so what we should do then is combine this information to make it apply to what we need to know. And what we need to know is that CO2 and oxygen, so carbon dioxide gas and oxygen gas, follow their own partial pressures. This is like that tongue twister. How many partial pressures does it take to blah, 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 blah? I don't know. It's always just in my mouth. This is significant, y'all, because these gases move in opposite directions. You have oxygen coming into the body, moving from the alveoli to the blood, from the blood to the tissue. And then you have carbon dioxide gas being picked up from the tissue to the blood, from the blood to the alveoli and out. And we were talking about gases move with pressure changes from a high to low pressure. So how can we have gases moving in opposite directions? Because they each have their own partial pressure. So we still know that gases move from a high pressure to a low pressure. But now we can say, oh, oxygen moves from a high partial pressure of oxygen to a low partial pressure of oxygen. And carbon dioxide gas moves from a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide to a low partial pressure of carbon dioxide gas. So that's the significance. When we talk about the alveolar ventilation, we'll see that there's really two factors that are affecting this. So one factor is perfusion. We defined perfusion before as the flow of blood. And here we're talking about the flow of blood in that pulmonary capillary bed. My window is getting too sunny, so I had to relocate again. So perfusion is talking about the flow of blood, in this case in the pulmonary capillary, and everything that we learned about the capillary as a resource allocation master still applies. So what we'll see is that the levels of carbon dioxide gas, the level of oxygen gas, the level of the pH level can all alter blood flow through the pulmonary capillary. Okay, so we should know about that information. That should be okay for us. What we'll see too is when we're at the alveoli, we'll see that a high partial pressure of carbon dioxide gas. So we represent partial pressure of carbon dioxide gas with the capital P for partial pressure, and then the subscript of the gas, so in this case CO2. That's going to trigger a dilation of those bronchioles. So we have a buildup of carbon dioxide gas in the alveoli. We're going to dilate the bronchioles, which is going to help with the blood airflow exchange with the environment. If we have a high partial pressure of oxygen gas in the alveoli, then the pulmonary arteries dilate. I should say arterioles. Remember, arteries, arterioles are moving away from the heart, and the pulmonary arterioles would be bringing blood to away from the heart to the alveoli. So if you have a high partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli, then you want to increase your blood flow to the alveoli. So that's what this is talking about. So here we're saying if you have high partial pressure of carbon dioxide gas in the alveoli, that's causing a dilation of the bronchioles. So that's helping you to get air out, back out into the environment. If you have a high partial pressure of oxygen gas in the alveoli, that's going to increase your blood flow from the heart to the alveoli to pick up that oxygen. When we are looking at then our alveolar ventilation and this exchange, what we can do is imagine for ourselves, let's do a kind of a simple drawing. So I'm going to represent here an alveoli, just kind of a half circle. That's the space that I have. And then let me just get a red marker to then represent my capillary vessel. And so what we would see is at the alveoli, we're going to have a partial pressure of oxygen at 104 millimeters of mercury. And we'd have a partial pressure of CO2 in the alveoli of like 40 millimeters per mercury. So remember, millimeters of mercury is how we measure pressure. When we look in the capillary as it comes through, the partial pressure of oxygen inside the capillary is usually like 64 millimeters of mercury. And the partial pressure of carbon dioxide gas in the capillary is usually like 45 millimeters of mercury. So if we compare our partial pressures, we can see the direction that material moves, that the gases move. So the oxygen is going to move from the alveoli into the capillary. Make that really big. It's going from a high partial pressure of oxygen to a low partial pressure of oxygen. And then when we look at our CO2, we see the direction is opposite way. So we see that the carbon dioxide gas is moving from the capillary into the alveoli. Remember this location here where this gas exchange is occurring? We talked about it before as the respiratory membrane. So in addition to the cell of the alveoli and the cell of the capillary, we had a basement membrane just connecting the two. The other thing that I wanted to mention here is we do see like, it looks like there's a more of a difference. There is more of a difference in the oxygen partial pressures versus the carbon dioxide gas partial pressures. But what we see is CO2 is more soluble than the water. Excuse me, more soluble than the oxygen. And so what that means basically for us is that even though the partial pressure is not as different, we still see like a balanced amount of CO2 and oxygen moving because of this particular factor. Both of our gases need some kind of transporters because even though CO2 is more soluble, they're still not like super soluble. And so we're going to be talking about how are these gases transported. That comes up next. And the other thing that we've mentioned already is that these gases are lipid soluble, which means they move through that phospholipid bilayer with ease. So they're able to do that, you know, without the help of a protein carrier channel. Okay, up next, we're ready to talk about internal respiration and how those gases are transported. So stay tuned. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other.